Hey, hello, 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 hello. Oh my word, we've got people here already. I have checked, my microphone is on, so God willing, you can hear what I'm saying. Oh, there we go, looking good. Hey, I have notes. Oh, that's terrible camera angle. Let's try that again. There we are. That's better. Okay. Hi there. Welcome to. This isn't my first YouTube live stream, but it's certainly the first one for a long time. I've been live streaming on Facebook. Basically, I thought I'd move it all over to YouTube because quite a lot of people were asking me to upload my live streams to YouTube. And I started doing that in an edited form, but I decided that fundamentally that wasn't a good use of my time, ultimately. So what I thought would be more constructive is to do a Friday live stream straight to YouTube. That can save and upload to YouTube. People can join as and when they wish and ask questions and stuff if they want to. Meanwhile, I will try and come with something constructive to talk about each week. And I had some things to talk about this week, and I decided that I was going to push those back a little bit. Instead, I thought it would be helpful to use this first YouTube live stream as an opportunity to talk about Horizon Wars, where it fits in the plan for Precinct Omega, and what I see happening down the next 6, 12, 24 months for Precinct Omega so that you guys can have some anticipation of what I'm working on, what you can get involved in, and why it's worth tagging along and seeing what Precinct Omega is up to. So, have I got nobody on the chat? We've got a couple of people watching. That's nice. Thank you guys who've dropped some likes in. That's fantastic. So let's talk about Horizon Wars, first of all. So you may remember, 2 seconds. I should have been prepared for this. I was prepared for everything else, but I wasn't prepared for this. Right, okay. So this is the original Horizon Wars game. This was published by Osprey Games back in 2016. There's still a big enthusiastic fan support for this game, and I want to acknowledge and feed back to that. But I cannot republish this. Osprey and I have amicably separated. I own the rights to the game, the text, the setting, everything in that. But they did this wonderful job with the art, with the layout. The photography is mine. But they own all of the bells and whistles. So I can't just republish the original book. I could republish the text, but in the light of my later work, it would seem futile to republish just a blank text, particularly when there are things in the game that, in retrospect, could have been better. So what I'm doing instead is prepping to write a new game. But before we get to that, Horizon Wars, as a result of that, has moved on from just being a game to being a setting, a family of games, and it's in its essence, it's an exploitable intellectual property. That's what Horizon Wars is. It is something that I intend to use to make money for my business. So the first thing is to think of Horizon Wars first and at its core as this setting, this timeline. Now, at the moment, it's a 500-year-long timeline from the beginning of the 22nd century through to the beginning of the 27th century. And it's got various sort of roughly 100-year chunks within which each narrative is set in the story. So they can be thought of as sort of like 3 chapters, volumes, eras. I called them eras in the original book, but obviously anybody who knows anything about geology will know that era is the wrong word. So essentially it all starts with the burning in 2116. When the world descends into chaos, and it goes through the ups and downs of human civilization until it terminates at the end of the the Infinite Dark timeline, where we have something called the New Age. Now, I haven't expanded upon the New Age in any of my writing before. In fact, even the term the New Age is yet to be sort of nailed down. But it's a 500-year story. And when I say a 500-year story, I do mean it is a 500-year long plot. I have a specific plot thread that starts at the beginning of the 22nd century and runs through 500 years. And those who've sort of engaged with Horizon Wars, with Zero Dark, will be familiar with the the fundamentals of the story. That there's this mystery, and the bit in Zero Dark that most people settle on is the fact that most of the population of Earth disappears apparently overnight. But there's more to it than just that. Okay, we've got a couple of comments on. We've got a hello from that's from Rory at Culloden Painting Studio, and from Axanax. Good to see you. Good to see you too. Thank you very much for joining my first YouTube live stream. Okay, so I've got a 500-year plot line, and my plan over the next 5+ years of Precinct Omega is to basically gradually first tell that story from start to finish, and then retell that story in increasing detail, adding in new details, adding in new parts of the narrative, so that over an extended period we should be able to fill it out, introduce new plot lines, new characters, new stories that all fit within this 500-year period. I do loosely have a plan for the subsequent 500 years, but I'll be honest, I'm not expecting necessarily to get there. It's just something in the back of my head. Long way from being fleshed out. Okay, so that's the first thing. So Horizon Wars as a setting is going to evolve and grow and have more and more detail built onto it over the next 5+ years of Precinct Omega. That's the number one plan. Second thing I wanted to talk about is Horizon Wars as a game, because people still talk about this book as Horizon Wars, and I need to try and move away from that eventually. And so I'm working on a new game called Horizon Wars Midnight Dark that will be effectively the second edition of this. So it will be built on exactly the same core design principles, same core mechanics, but it will eliminate all of the things in this book that I think weren't right, and it will add more of the things that have been learned from this book that I think are really good. And that will be Midnight Dark. My broad planning publication date for Midnight Dark is 2023. I have started writing it. If you want to participate in the beta testing, it's not going to be on beta test for a while, but there will be early content released to my patrons as and when it's ready for consumption. Right, that's Midnight Dark. If you've got any questions, by the way, about anything that I say along the way, stick them into the chat. I'll see it pop up on my screen, and I'll have a look and see if I can answer any of the questions. Okay, next. Oh, yes, I wanted to talk more. So what Midnight Dark will look like. So it'll look a lot like these, hopefully. It'll be a glossy hardback book. How it will be published, printed, I mean, I would like to move away from Wargame Vault for various reasons, but it does offer some fantastic utility. Whether I'll stay with Wargame Vault in some form or another, I don't know. But I'd like to up the quality. These books that Wargame Vault produces with their partners at Lightning Source, they're really nice, but they could be better. They could be better. I could do better in my formatting and my design, but likewise, the quality of the paper and the content, it's fine, but it's not the quality I'd like it to be, which is more like this from Osprey, who've got a higher quality, higher GSM, better finish. The quality of the printing here is much better. I want to get up to this kind of standard. So Midnight Dark will be a book like that. It'll be a new self-contained game. Like Zero Dark and Infinite Dark, it will contain solo rules, solo missions, as well as PvP missions. And like Zero Dark, it will have supplements that tell more of the story and provide new content, new rules, new missions to play both solo and PvP. Right, that's Midnight Dark. So Midnight Dark is going to be both so if you imagine that I've written a trilogy, so I've written these two and Infinite Dark, which is on the other side of the room. So I've written this trilogy, but this is not a Precinct Omega book. This is the Osprey Games book, and then we've got the Precinct Omega book. So I'm going to complete the Precinct Omega trilogy of Horizon Wars. Zero Dark, Infinite Dark, Midnight Dark will be our trilogy of books when we're finished. Each book will then be accompanied by a trilogy of supplements. So the first one is out now for Zero Dark. Operation Nemesis was out last October. It's very good. And this essentially adds new rules, alternative rules, and extra content to this. The follow-up to Operation Nemesis is Operation Kurgan. That is well advanced with the writing. It will be out probably Q1 next year. That is my expectation. And it will be like Operation Nemesis in that it will tell a story. It will contain missions for you to play that are both PvP and versus. It will contain new rules, new options, heroes, gadgets, upgrades, that kind of stuff, new Red Force. And all of that will be as much as Operation Nemesis, but it will be different. You know, it will have a different approach to its campaign. It will have a particular theme. In fact, its particular theme is spies and the media. So you can expect spooks and MJs to focus quite significantly around the new rules. Then Operation Kurgan will focus primarily on Mars. And then we've got another operation book to follow, which is yet to have a title. And that will focus around the different factions of the survivors on Earth. So even though only 10% of Earth's population is left on the planet after the impact of Amit, of that 10% still represents a larger number of people than live on either Mars or Venus. So it's still, they're a very large group of people. They're just spread out all over this devastated planet, and they've got some interesting social challenges. There are three groups within the Terran survivors. You have the Gaians. The Gaians are people who refused to participate in the society of Earth at the time. They mostly lived in the wasteland illegally between the city-states, and spent their lives avoiding the patrols of the city-states and generally fighting against them. They are survivalists, they are anti-authoritarian, they are all a little bit nuts, but they feel very strongly that the Earth belongs to them, and they very much want to expel the Venusian and Martian invaders. Then you have the city folk who, for whatever reason, did not leave in whatever event happened at the Amit impact. And those include things like, they include criminal gangs and various corporate members and some sort of society dropouts, but not so dropped out that they were going to leave the city-states. And they are more sort of compliant with the rescue mission, but they still have their own agenda. And they particularly don't want the Gaians muscling in and taking over what they perceive as their inheritance of the cities. And then third, you've got the Terrans who weren't on Earth at the time of the Amit impact. They're off deep in space doing exploration, mining, all kinds of things, trading with Mars and Venus. They then return to Earth, and they are the most high-tech faction because they have all of Earth's technology. They've got access to all of their knowledge, all of their resources, but they're a tiny, tiny group. And they see themselves very much as Earth's residual aristocracy with an absolute right to rule and command Earth. So you can see that those three factions are at odds with one another, and they are at odds with the Martian and Terran invaders. So the third volume will focus on those three factions. Each of those factions will get their own act within the narrative campaign that's part of the book, and that will also wrap up the story that's told. So we tell three stories, we tell a story throughout the three missions. If you've read Operation Nemesis, you'll know how the story starts. Operation Kurgan picks up the baton from the end of Operation Nemesis, takes the story forwards, and then our third mission book will sort of take it to a conclusion of some sort. So that's what we're going on for Zero Dark, but I have a specific timeline. So in So Zero Dark was published in 2020. In 2025, 5 years after Zero Dark was first published, I plan to publish a second edition of Zero Dark. You know, it's a good game. I stand on it as a entertaining, interesting, fun game. I am not going to stand here and tell you that it is a perfect piece of work. I worked on it a great deal in isolation. I've worked on it since with my patrons and with others who are interested and who've contributed to making the game better. I mean, just this morning, I had a fantastic question on the Facebook group for Zero Dark that I couldn't believe had never been asked before because it was such an obvious question. Now, the answer was quite easy to come to, but it's not in the rules. It's not there. There are flaws in the rules. So I'm looking forward to doing a second edition. So it'll be the same game, same core rules, same mechanics. There's nothing wrong with the layout and content of this book as I see it, but it will fix all those problems. It will expand the rules. It will build in the best stuff that's been published here already. So all the new material from the three supplements will get built back into the game for the second edition, and then we'll start again. And there'll be 3 more supplements for the new book that will do the same thing as before. So they'll tell a story set on Earth, but it will be a different story. So all of these missions that are in the original books are still valid. You know, the rules here are still valid, but they'll have been built back into the second edition. The missions will still be good missions. The stories will still be good stories, and we'll tell a new story about a different group wrapped up in a different political espionage challenge, whatever it might be. We'll tell a brand new story, maybe in a different order. Maybe we won't start with Venus. Maybe we'll start with Mars or start with Earth or start with a completely new faction. Possibly a new faction. We'll see. We'll see. So that's the plan for Zero Dark. We'll start again. But I have other plans for Zero Dark as well, because at the moment, as I said at the start, the Zero Dark story is built around what's called the Second Colonial War, which is the return of Mars and Venus to Earth after the impact of the asteroid Amit. And I'm going to push that story a bit wider over the next 3 to 4 years. The first place I want to push it is backwards a little bit. So I've been working for a long time on a supplement to Zero Dark called Antediluvium, which is going to be a more cyberpunk take. So Zero Dark, quite a cyberpunky game. You know, it's got electronic warfare operators who are combat hackers, and it's got synthetics and robots and all that good stuff. But it's still quite, I mean, I call it milpunk because it's quite military focused. So Antediluvium is going to be more cyberpunk. It's going to be more sort of renegade rogue. It's going to be set before Amit's impact within one of those Terran factions, the one that hasn't left the cities but isn't engaging with the society of the city-states. So it's going to be the undercity, the underclass, people who are trying to get by, and it's going to be the story of their fight for survival in the Terran undercities. Antediluvium, it's what it's called. When? No idea. But I'm going to add that as a setting with its own rules, same core rules as Zero Dark, but particularly with different rules for building your teams. Teams will be larger, but they'll be less elite. They'll have a number of factions to choose from that we don't do in Zero Dark proper, and those factions will have various advantages, disadvantages. And will you see Antediluvium's content slightly repeat itself when we get to the third volume, the third operation manual? Yes, you will. A little bit. So it'll be kind of a testing ground for stuff that's going to come in a few years' time. I'd also like to go even further back to the Colonial War. So the first Colonial War took place primarily on Mars and represented the competing corporations that were attempting to settle respectively Mars and Venus. And as they run out of resources and money, they start to turn on each other to cannibalize each other's resources. And then the media on Earth get involved trying to perpetuate that battle because it's incredibly good for ratings. So that's the story I'd like to tell. So we're sort of pushing the clock back on Zero Dark, using the game to tell earlier stories within the same timeline, but stories that have got a different feel. Each one uses the same core rules, but gives people a different kind of gaming experience to the very sort of military special forces focus of Zero Dark itself. And I'm already starting to do this with my patrons vaguely, is looking forward, way forward in the timeline to a version of Zero Dark that is set at the same time broadly as the Infinite Dark setting, possibly even after the end of the Infinite Dark setting. So that's already appeared in part on the Patreon campaign, and it's called Millennium. So that's the setting there. And that just gets a little bit, to be completely honest, it gets quite grimdark. So it does draw upon, it's an opportunity for people to use miniatures they may already have from other games that are a bit more weird, a bit more pulpy, as I say, a bit more grimdark, that don't necessarily fit in the hard sci-fi setting of Zero Dark. This just gives them a little bit more leeway to be a little bit more odd. Right. Okay, that's it for Zero Dark. Last is Infinite Dark, and I am going to step away and grab a copy. I've got some comments. I can see I've got some comments. Let's have a look. Who have we got? Okay, Dale Platt. Midnight Dark will be a lot better as it will have rules for cover. Yes, thank you, Dale. I appreciate that. Yes, Midnight Dark will have rules for cover. If you're in the unlikely event that you're watching this live and that doesn't mean anything to you, it was extremely embarrassing that the paragraph for cover rules in Horizon Wars got missed out by me. Multiple opportunities I had to notice they were missing. I'd written them. They just weren't in the manuscript that I sent to Osprey Games, and they didn't notice, and I didn't notice until the whole thing was published. Very embarrassing. Anyway, yes, it will have rules for cover. Will it have rules of battle taxis from Axe and Axe? No. Never. Unless they're flying battle taxis. It will have rules for flying battle taxis, but no. Again, if that's not a familiar reference to you, one thing that you cannot do in Horizon Wars is load a squad of soldiers into an armored vehicle, move it to another location, drop off the soldiers, and have the armored vehicle go off and give somebody else a lift. For many reasons, the primary one being that is not how armored vehicles work on the battlefield. Never has been, and there's no reason to think it ever will be. There we are. That's all I'm saying. Right. Hello from Australia. Hi, Australia. ADSPHOE, however I'm supposed to pronounce that. Adspo. There we go. Yes, Rory says, cover rules, yes. Battle taxis, no. Just as it should be. Exactly correct. Oh, Axe and Axe is okay. I know who Axe and Axe is now. Responsible for Daventhalus de Montholt. Yes, yes. He will appear again. We've had him in one of the supplements. It's so harsh people bring that up still. I don't mind. Listen, it's funny. It's one of those things that I love having this interaction with the community of players, that we can have these inside jokes and these conversations and this ongoing dialogue that contains stuff that people can find out about quite easily. It's not stuff we keep to ourselves. We always explain it when it comes up. So people can join the community. They can find out about that story, and then now they're participating. And it's like a rite of initiation within the Horizon Wars world to find out about cover rules. That every time I release a new set of rules, somebody will say, has it got rules for cover? That's, yeah, I get that. It's absolutely fine. There's nothing not to love about flying battlefield taxis. No, there will always be flying battlefield taxis. That's definitely the thing. I am going to do flying elements in Horizon Wars Midnight Dark will probably be the biggest change from the original rules. Now, I stand by the original rules for flying elements in Horizon Wars. They are, for what they were trying to achieve, they are good rules. But a lot of people do just skip them over because they find them too different to the rest of the game. And people would say, oh, they're too complicated. They're not. Compared to the rules for moving aircraft in other games, they are absolutely not complicated. But compared to how simple the rest of the game is, they did stand apart. They're going to be handled very, very differently in the new version of the game. I am currently playtesting some alternative approaches. Haven't settled on precisely how it will work, but I tend to think it'll be a mixture of different things. Right, so having had that break, let's move on and talk about Infinite Dark. So Infinite Dark is still maturing as a game. If you haven't come across it, it is the spaceship miniatures combat game using broadly the same mechanics as the others. The setting is further in the future, and I do intend to release 3 supplements for Infinite Dark as well. For those of you who've read the rules, 1 for each command level. I already have the story written. I already know who the characters will be and more or less what the missions will be, but I haven't yet started work on it. So don't hold your breath. It'll be around eventually. The thing with Infinite Dark, there's 2 things with Infinite Dark that are going to hamper its development. Well, make its development slower. That I will say, slower. Number 1, it simply doesn't sell as well. Spaceship miniature combat games are just not as popular as skirmish games. Just a fact. And it's going to be true of Midnight Dark as well. You know, 6mm battlefield combat games, just not as popular as sci-fi skirmish. This is where the money's at. And at the end of the day, I'm trying to make a living out of this. So Zero Dark is almost always going to be my flagship game within this series. So whilst I do want to do Midnight Dark, and I'm looking forward to doing Midnight Dark, and I am going to develop Infinite Dark, they will always be the poor relations to Zero Dark. It's just the nature of miniatures wargaming, particularly sci-fi miniatures wargaming. We love de-skirmish. So this is going to be slower. And a key reason for that isn't just because it's not worth my time putting it in when it doesn't sell as well, but rather it's because the feedback that I get about this game from the community is far more muted. So knowing what to add, what to change, what to fix, what people want is much, much more difficult in Infinite Dark because the dialogue about the game is simply 1,000 times quieter. It's a bit annoying that I released this just after A Billion Suns because I'm a member of the Billion Suns Facebook group and that thing is all over the place. Okay, there's new posts on that and their Discord is on fire and everybody's talking about A Billion Suns. It's a great game. Got nothing against it. It's a good game. There's no reason you couldn't play A Billion Suns and Infinite Dark and have a good time in both. A Billion Suns does not have a solo game. This does. And A Billion Suns requires a much larger collection of miniatures. This does not. But there we go. It's a thing. It's still a fabulous game, and the whole sort of jumping from section to section on your mat is incredibly cool. And it was actually proposed in an early phase of Infinite Dark. I decided not to do it. They did it in A Billion Suns, so I'm glad I didn't do it because I would absolutely have looked like I was ripping them off. But anyway, Infinite Dark development is going to be a lot slower. Can't see any new comments. Good stuff. Right. Okay. Good, that's halfway through. Excellent timing. So that is quickly an update on what you'll see and what to expect from Horizon Wars for the next 5 years. But this week has been a bit of a week of introspection for me, having a very, very hard, self-critical look at what Precinct Omega is doing, what it is achieving, how it's going to move forward. And one thing is clear, that, as I mentioned, Zero Dark is where the money is at for me. And even then, you know, I am hardly laughing all the way to the bank. So adding Midnight Dark to the trilogy will be satisfying, and it will represent a certain amount of income. But 3 games does not represent 3 times the income. Zero Dark will probably always sell 2 to 3 times as much as the other 2 games. And yet each game takes the same amount of development effort and time to maintain it. So I need to expand my offering, and I need to expand it in a way that is commercially intelligent, that fulfills my needs as a creator, responds to the requests that I have had from my community. And I need to do it in a way that maximizes the amount of money I'm going to make out of the experience. And if that sounds mercenary, I'm sorry. 2 seconds. I have a dog here who wants to leave. Go on. There we go. So if that sounds mercenary, I'm sorry. But it's the nature of having given up my salaried office job to do this. One of the reasons I did it wasn't just because I didn't like my office job. In fact, I was quite fond of my office job. But I really felt that I wanted to prove that this could be done. And at the moment, 18 months into this project, I don't feel like I have proved that at all. Which means I've gone back to my plan and had another look at my plan, and I've looked at some of my tactics associated with that, and I've even looked at my overall business strategy, and I have concluded that my plan needs to change. My original strategy was the pursuit of what amounts to a modest income. That's what I was looking for, a sustainable living income from my business. And I think I made the mistake of being insufficiently ambitious. It's not that I want more. It's not that I want more than I planned to be able to achieve, but that the effort required to achieve the modest level of income I would like from my business is such that you actually have to aim for a much larger, ambitious vision. And as a result, I've got 2 big things I want to add to what Precinct Omega is doing over the next 24 months. The first one will not be a surprise to most of you who are watching this live stream, which is miniatures. I have been planning to release miniatures for a long time. The process of working with the sculptor has run up against some obstacles. I hate to say it's not a problem. It ran up some obstacles on both sides of the relationship. We've always been very positive, always have been very open. I've had problems. He's had problems. That caused communication stoppages, sometimes for weeks or months at a time. We are now back on scope, and we have nearly got the first 4 designs finished. And that's the crucial start, that those first 4 designs are what I want to be able to take to Kickstarter. And the idea is to produce real life physical miniatures through a Kickstarter that will raise money. And we've got plans for a whole range of additional miniatures that could be added or extras and options that can be included as stretch goals if we do well. The miniatures look lovely. They're all based upon, they're inspired by the characters that appear in this book, Operation Nemesis. They don't look exactly like them because this is David's artistic vision, but they are inspired by these designs. So I look forward to showing them more publicly. At the moment, patrons have seen 3 out of 4 designs. The 4th design is nearly finished. 2 of those designs have been printed, and I have got the prints, and they look good. And the other 2 will go to the printer once the 4th design is finished. And once I've got those in hand, I can then start talking, go back to my casting partners to see what they can do. I was originally planning that they would be metal. As most of us probably know, the cost of white metal has gone up massively in the last 12 to 18 months. Most miniatures manufacturers that deal in metal are putting their prices up by 15 to 20%. And frankly, they are losing money by doing so, given the cost of white metal. So they're putting their prices up as much as they think the market can tolerate, but they're losing money as a result because the cost of tin alone has gone up between 30 and 50%. So, you know, it's hard times to be working in white metal. I am very, very interested in COcast, this new injection molded plastic that's being used by Corvus Belli now. But I haven't yet found a UK-based partner who is working in COcast that would be prepared to offer me their services. Those that are working in COcast are making their own stuff. So if you know anybody, I'll keep digging around, but if you know anybody who might be interested in being a COcast partner, please let me know and I can have a chat about costs and materials and stuff. So that's the sort of the first thing. And I've got some comments. What have we got? Awesome minis, yep, they'll make you pay the iron price for the metal. Yeah. From Noised, hi all, I'm working, so don't know if I can follow, but saw the live stream, stop by for a wave. Hey Noise, thanks for stopping in. Don't feel that you've got to hang around. Right, so that's miniatures. Now, before we finish talking about miniatures, I've said several times that Precinct Omega seeks to be a games company that makes miniatures, not a miniatures company that makes games. And I'd like that to continue to be the case, but I cannot ignore the fact that if I can get past the capital demands of creating the miniatures in the first place, if I can get past those to a place where I've got a range of miniatures designs, they are a relatively cost-efficient way to make money. There are a lot of other burdens associated with selling miniatures, not least the marketing of them. But there is a way to make money there. Now, it's absolutely not foolproof. I know that for a fact because I already own miniatures. I already own these guys, Bull Monsters. And these guys do not sell. I'll tell you that now. I have sold in the last 12 months 1 Bull Monster. Okay, single one. I should show you this one. You might find this funny. This is the Bull Monster that sold, which is it's called a Mine Ball in the setting. And if I hold him up to the camera, you'll just about see what he looks like. So it has been observed that he does look a lot like COVID-19. Sorry, I should say coronavirus, because COVID is the symptoms, not the disease itself. This does look a lot like coronavirus. So people have been, the one person who bought it to paint it as a Christmas tree decoration to celebrate 2020 and the coronavirus. I will be putting him on special offer for anybody else who wants to buy a coronavirus miniature for the end of this year. So it'll be up there. If you're interested, it's a thing. It's out there. Okay, got nothing else on the chat. Brittle. So miniatures. They're very demanding in time. That's the problem. So if I start heading down the miniatures path, it will begin to eat up time that I would otherwise rather be dedicating to designing games. The best way around that is to employ somebody to handle the administrative and sales side of the business, but the business doesn't make enough money to pay another person's salary. It barely makes enough money to pay my salary, and my salary is very small. So we'll see where that goes. Okay, I'm going to head into the miniatures thing anyway because I've got to start somewhere. We'll see. We'll see. I don't want it to compromise the game design side of the business, but like I say, I've got to do something. So the second thing, which is more important, I think, and interesting, is that I am going to be releasing 2 completely different games that have nothing to do with Horizon Wars. The first you've already met, which is Bull Monsters. Now, I've been banging my head against a conceptual brick wall for Bull Monsters for the best part of 3 years. And I've done 2 different beta test versions of the game. You know, I really worked through the game and play tested it and demoed it and put together a beta and shared it with the world. In both occasions, I've decided that game is wrong. It's not even a case that I've got to tweak it to make it better. It is just wrong. In the last few months, I have broken through a conceptual barrier when it comes to Bull Monsters. And although I don't have a new beta yet, I do think I have rejigged the core concept of the game in such a way that it's going to be a better, more interesting, more accessible game. So that is good news. So I am tentatively saying that Bull Monsters will be a finished playable game by the end of next year. But then there's the question of what I do with Bull Monsters. As I said, I already own the miniatures. So as a playable game, it will be available to my patrons. As soon as it's in beta, you guys will get it. But as a product, do I want to keep selling these guys or not selling these guys as blister miniatures for that game? Or should I turn the game into a boxed set? Now, I talked about box sets not long ago in my podcast. And they carry a lot of burdens, a lot of challenges. But it may represent a more accessible product for people if you can say everything you need to play the game is in a box. You get a mat, you get the dice, you get all the miniatures you need in a box. I am veering in that direction. And if I can find a CO cast partner to work with, it would make it doubly easy, because it would mean I could produce them as CO cast miniatures in different colors. So they wouldn't even need to be painted. You'd have 2 teams in 2 different colors out of the box, ready to go. So I'm still working on that concept and what it's going to look. There will be a playable Bull Monsters game for my patrons by the end of 2022. That is, I am fixed upon that. Whether I get to make it into a box game will depend upon my Kickstarter experience with the miniatures, because that's the other reason I want to take these miniatures to Kickstarter, is to have the experience of Kickstarter, to understand what it involves, what the challenges are, what the obstacles are, how to overcome them, who to work with. I think going through it once on my own will almost certainly come with various challenges, many challenges that we'll have to overcome. And I'll, communicate with my backers as well as I can through all of those challenges. But it's going to be a learning experience, and it will be a learning experience that I can then leverage to any future crowdfunding activities, whether they stay on Kickstarter, move to some other platform, or I do something more like North Star Minis and have, a pre-order arrangement rather than a Kickstarter. Put my money on the table. We'll see. So that was one of the things, one of the games that I want to release in the next 2 years is Ball Monsters. There is going to be another game. It is going to be entirely separate from Ball Monsters. It's going to be entirely separate from Zero Dark. It is going to be a fantasy skirmish game with a completely new mechanical system. I don't know what that system is going to be. And I have specifically not done work on what that system is going to be because I'm starting a new video series. I shared the first video with my patrons earlier this week, and this afternoon, just check time, this afternoon it's going to go live on YouTube for everybody else, and it's called Game Design Tutor, which is me, initially just me, either working with other people or talking to camera about the process of game design. And I'm going to talk to other people to use their aspirations for game design to talk through points and principles of how to start thinking about games and where to start and how to pick up and how to sort of get past conceptual challenges as part of the process of game design. I'm going to have other episodes where it's just me talking to camera about my own game, about this new game. So I want to try and make sure I do as much development as possible on camera so that you can actually see the live process of game development. I will eliminate all the bits of me staring into space. I will try and make sure that I come with work having been done, but I'm not going to do all the work in advance and then come and lay it all out on camera. It's going to be an episodic process of development so that you can follow the development of the game from nothing to published. The other thing, and I've already reached out to a couple of people to ask about this, the other thing I'm hoping to do with Game Design Tutor, because it's not just my voice, I'm conscious that I'm actually not a very experienced game designer, professionally speaking. So I have actually reached out to a couple of other designers to maybe come back and join me on the Game Design Tutor podcast, either to help me with my game or better still, to get them together with another person who is struggling with some aspect of game design to talk it through from their expert position, and then I can just be there as a moderator. So those are my plans to try and push Precinct Omega through. And the Game Design Tutor series is one I hope will be important to the plan as a whole, because one thing I have not been able to do yet is monetize my YouTube presence. And I put a lot of time into creating YouTube videos, which fundamentally pay me back very little. It's very hard to know how much my presence on YouTube attracts sales. Not all that much as far as I can tell. I certainly don't make any money out of the videos themselves at this point. There are monetization standards on YouTube that you have to achieve before your channel can be monetized. And I am about halfway there. So just as my patrons are following the process of me creating and developing a miniatures wargaming business from scratch, so the YouTube journey is the same. It is the process of trying to build a YouTube channel from scratch to achieve some level of monetization. So if you're interested, follow along. If you know people who might be interested, let them know. Please push them in my direction, because heaven knows I need the views. And the subscribe. So if you're on and you've not yet subscribed to the Precinct Omega podcast, Precinct Omega YouTube channel, please do. There is a subscribe button somewhere there, or there, I think. I'm not sure. There's a subscribe button somewhere around here. Maybe it's down there somewhere. Look, click the subscribe button. Please, you're doing me a favor, and I promise I'm working as hard as I can to make the content useful and interesting. Right, that's it. I've sort of powered through everything I wanted to talk about. What have we got on for comments? That was me. That was you, Apocrypha Now. Yes, that was you. ADSPHOE says, sounds right with that game. Relic Blade was the same. I have no idea what that comment is referring to. Sorry. Axanax got to head off. Thanks for coming, Axanax. Good to see you. DK is here. Does this ultimately lead to a conquering the game design business RPG? I'm not going to go into RPGs. Rory at Culloden Painting Studio says, sounds like a great idea for a series. Good. ADSPHOE says, my mate did a Kickstarter. I have insights. I'm delighted to say I have already had some very experienced Kickstarter people reach out to me with advice, with resources and links, and I've got people I can go to. So I do appreciate offers, and if you're on the Patreon, you're always welcome to message me with advice and insights on Kickstarter. I mean, I've got so much to read before. Basically, I'm getting to the point that I've got the miniatures and that I've got my partners lined up and everybody's clear. And basically, I want to do as much pre-Kickstarter content as possible before I sit down and plan the Kickstarter strategy, because I don't want to be putting time into planning a Kickstarter strategy until I'm actually in a position to start the Kickstarter. Otherwise, I'm just making fantasies. So I've got to get all the miniatures printed. I've got to get them resin cast and get the resin masters made. And the resin masters will be available for patrons to buy exclusively. And the big, long-time, high-value patrons, yeah, you'll get free ones. You're cool. Once I've got the resin masters made, those will go to either the metal casting or the CO cast partner, whichever one I end up working with. And then once the molds are made and I've put out the capital to just create the master molds and we are ready to go for run, only at that point will I start sitting down and planning the Kickstarter itself. So there's still a lot to do. There's a lot to learn from this. But it's important to me that whatever I take to Kickstarter for the first Kickstarter has to be, I mean, it doesn't have to fund. If it doesn't fund, I don't care. You know, that's life. But if it does fund, it has to deliver. I cannot afford to go into Kickstarter and be in the position of having funded and then for whatever reason not being able to deliver. That would be disastrous for my reputation, for my business. It would be so many kinds of bad. So I am not going to let that happen. I'm going to make sure that as much has been done in advance as I can possibly afford to do. And then even if the Kickstarter fails, I've still got molds and I can still make runs and I can still sell miniatures somehow. So that's where we are with Kickstarter. Cool. Lovely. Right. I think that was it. Next week, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. I'll come up with something. I was going to talk about making polystyrene terrain because I have made a lot of polystyrene terrain in the last couple of weeks. As you can see, it's all laid out here on the table. I've just finished today using all of my scrap polystyrene that I had left over, making this mountain dome. Why is my focus gone? What's up with your focus? There we go. Making this scrap rock tower as my final piece of terrain. It's completely unrelated to anything here. This was just offcuts and leftovers. Needs to have a weighted base put on it and get painted and stuff. But I've been making a lot of polystyrene terrain, and I was going to talk about that, but I've run out of polystyrene. So I'm not going to talk about that next week. So if anybody's got any suggestions, anything they'd like me to talk about, any questions, queries, topics, subjects, if anybody would like to join me on the live stream, let me know. At worst case scenario, next week we'll be over at the model bench and I'm going to be assembling some complicated resin 6mm miniatures, and we'll talk about assembly and minis and stuff. All right. Brilliant. Thank you for coming, everybody. It's been awesome to talk to you. Thank you for joining in the chat. Thank you for joining my first YouTube live stream. And I think we're going to call that done 55 minutes in. So thank you very much for coming, everybody. And I will speak to you all again next week.